Trump admin halts construction of nearly finished offshore wind farm. Ørsted's Revolution Wind project off the coast of Massachusetts and Rhode Island is hit with a stop work order over vague national security concerns. It happened again. For the second time this year, the Trump administration has halted the construction of a massive offshore wind farm being built to power blue states. On Friday, the acting director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Matthew Giacona, ordered the Danish wind developer Ørsted to stop all construction on the nearly complete Revolution Wind offshore project so the federal government can address concerns related to the protection of national security interests of the United States. Giacona, a former lobbyist of offshore oil and gas companies, did not specify the nature of those concerns. Gianna, a former lobbyist for offshore oil and gas companies. He did not specify the nature of those concerns. Oh man, I wonder what those concerns are. Could it be the whales? Could it be the harmonic frequencies that these wind turbines project into the waters, and it messes with the frequency of the whales pathing and could it be that? Or could it be money? Could it be the money that it would take away from oil and gas interests? Man, it's really hard to figure out which one. It's really, really hard to figure out which one. Are they doing this for cynical money interests to enrich their homeboys at the expense of the average person living in Rhode Island and Massachusetts? Is it going to, who's going to benefit from this, right? Is it going to be the average person living in Rhode Island or Massachusetts who has their electricity bill necessarily increase over the long run over what it would be had this project be allowed to finish? Or is it going to be the gas and oil company executives who are able to make more secure long-term profits because they don't have to compete with wind energy at a large scale in this region of the country? I wonder. It's really, really hard to figure out. This administration is just such good faith. They're so good faith. They're obviously in it for the people. So it really makes me lean towards the good faith argument. There's no way they're doing this just to enrich the oil and gas company interests and homeboys that support the Trump administration. There's no way, right? That's just insane to imagine. The move echoes an April order from the Interior Department that stopped all offshore work on New York's Empire Wind project. Last time, the controversial pause lasted just 1 month, but cost the developer nearly $1 billion and drove the project to the brink of cancellation. This time, with a Trump appointee now at the helm of BOEM, it's unclear how long this costly work stoppage might last. What is the possible signature? The plausible, deniable pretext they gave for this is national security. What possible? It's a Danish it's a Danish wind farm company. What national security concerns could you possibly have, right? You would think if they were actually doing this in good faith, there was legitimate, serious national security concerns. They would probably try and be a little bit more specific, but they would also make it very clear that they are trying to get this done as quickly as possible because they understand the importance of the scale of this project and the amount of money that will be lost by the people, funding it and the benefits that it will have from the people living in that region, right? You'd think that they would make it very clear, we're trying to get this through as quickly as possible, right? There's some legitimate security concerns, but we're going to try and get that figured out as quickly as possible, guys, so we can get the train back on the tracks and get it rolling. But it's very clear that is not what they're doing, right? And it's very clear that this is a cynical attempt to try and hurt the wind farm. Construction began on Revolution Wind in January 2024 and is now 80% complete, according to Ørsted. The wind farm is being built off the coast of Massachusetts and Rhode Island in a federally designated wind energy area that was created after a 5-year-long consultation between the state of Massachusetts, coastal towns, federal agencies, and branches of the military, including the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, and Army Corps of Engineers. Once the 704 megawatt project is complete, its cables will come ashore in Rhode Island and its carbon-free electricity will be fed onto New England's regional grid and serve utility customers who saw their power bills skyrocket this past winter. It's one of 5 offshore wind projects under construction in U.S. waters. The country currently has only one fully operational utility-scale offshore wind project, South Fork near Long Island, New York. President Donald Trump promised that America would see no new windmills on his watch. Friday's order, it's just, we elected however many millions of people in this country willingly elected a guy who thinks like wind power and solar power are actually bad, that they're actually like causing, they're messing with your brain and are bad for the whales. And bro, none of this is coming from a legitimate place of concern, right? I have a really hard time believing Trump actually has a problem with windmills, okay? I don't think Trump gives 6 about windmills or the impact that it has on the whales or anything about that, right? The only thing he cares about is enriching himself and his homies and the sycophants who sucked up to him and got him in the place he is, right? And who was a big part of those sycophant suck-ups? Well, it's the oil and gas interests. And they don't want to have to compete with windmills at a large scale. Just the whole idea that the president of the United States is saying, we promise America will see no new windmills, is just so like insanely backwards. We're living in idiocracy, right? This is like straight out of the movie Idiocracy. So much of what this administration does and has been doing could be straight out of Idiocracy, but this is one of them, right? You can't even come up with any legitimate, like, good faith pretext, plausible, deniable argument as to why you would want no new windmills. There is none. It is pure cynical reasoning. Pure, I'm trying to enrich my homeboys at the oil and gas companies and whatnot because they helped me get elected. Friday's order is just the latest attempt to make good on that pledge. In recent months, the Trump administration has killed offshore wind leasing, paused permitting, and sunsetted tax credits critical to the economic viability of offshore wind farms. The purpose, and like what I don't get about all of this, what I keep coming back to when it comes to trying to squash renewable energy resources, right? Even if you believe climate change is a hoax and that going for renewables over non-renewables is a futile, pointless effort in regards to climate change and whatnot, that there's no point, in that you aren't doing any good by not going to the non-renewables, right? Even if you believe that, you would still be in favor of wind and solar because it is just economically more profitable than would be a coal or natural gas or one of those types of power plants, right? And the reasoning is very clear and obvious, okay? With a natural gas power plant, you need a constant flow in of natural gas, right? If you cut off you kink the hose of the natural gas, the power plant will stop working, okay? And all that natural gas coming into the plant costs money, right? You have to continually keep buying fuel forever in perpetuity as long as this power plant exists to keep it running. But that is not the case with solar and wind power, as the wind just blows and will blow practically forever, right? The sun will shine and will continue to shine practically forever, right? I understand that there are some like infrastructure costs and maintenance costs and all those stuff that's associated with that. So it's not literally like you build the windmill and, you hands off, it's totally fine and it's just pure money from that point. But the principle still stands, right? There is no necessary input into the system for solar or wind power. And in that sense, it's much more economically efficient and profitable because you're basically just getting power out of almost nothing. And that nothing being just a small amount of maintenance and infrastructure nonsense. Even if you thought climate change was a hoax and that somehow there's no attachment between human activity and climate change, you would still be in favor of this if you thought about this economically at all, right? If you ever took an economics class in college or whatever, you would still be in favor of this. So that's what gets me about all these Republicans that pretend like they're fiscal conservatives and that they're all about economics or whatever, but then they support this or don't say anything about this when Trump tries to do this sort of thing. It's like, Bro, this flies in the face of basic economics 101, of basic macroeconomics, let alone putting aside the whole flying in the face of all the evidence we have that climate change is human caused. The purpose given for Friday's stop work order, national security interests, has long-time wind industry insiders scratching their heads. There were no major military issues that came to the fore in New England, said wind energy veteran Bill White in an interview with Canary Media. They also said that they coordinated with the U.S. military, Navy, and all of those branches and whatnot to ensure that the project was totally kosher by everybody's standards, okay? From 2009 to 2015, White represented Massachusetts on a BOEM-led intergovernmental task force focused on the responsible sitting of offshore wind energy areas south of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket Islands. Was the military at the table, represented and consulted with during this stakeholder process? The answer is very much so, said White, who for much of his time on the task force worked for the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center as senior director of offshore wind sector development. White, who went on to oversee offshore wind as CEO of Avangrid Offshore, one of the developers of Massachusetts' embattled Vineyard Wind project, said he's aware of national security issues that have been raised about proposed offshore wind projects near Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina, which have coastlines dotted with large military installations. In April 2023, for example, the Pentagon flagged proposed wind energy areas in the central Atlantic coast as highly problematic. But the Pentagon has not raised those kinds of high-level concerns over Revolution Wind, or any of the projects being built in New England's waters, according to White. Development of the Revolution Wind project began more than a decade ago. In 2013, Deepwater Wind New England LLC won a federal auction for 2 leases in the wind energy area designated by the Intergovernmental Task Force. Ørsted later acquired those leases when it bought the company. From 2016 to 2020, the Danish firm assessed the site and continued to engage stakeholders like local fishermen, according to the BOEM records. Between 2020 and 2023, Revolution Wind endured an extensive regulatory review, including from the Pentagon and the Federal Aviation Administration. Since wind turbines have the potential to affect air traffic radar and aviation navigation, the FAA conducted an airspace analysis. The agency ultimately approved the project under the condition that all turbines be built to lighting and marking standards that would ensure they're visible to aircraft at night. In August 2023, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers co-signed the authorization of plans for Ørsted to build 65 wind turbines for the Revolution Wind project. The National Marine Fisheries Service, a branch of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also signed the authorization. During Revolution Wind's long road to construction, it had strong support from neighboring states, which have made ambitious renewable energy commitments in recent years. The Trump administration's stop work order on Revolution Wind undermines efforts to expand our energy supply, lower costs for families and businesses, and strengthen regional reliability, said Rhode Island Governor Dan Mackey, a Democrat, in a statement. See, that's what gets me is they mentioned that electricity costs exploded last year up in the Northeast, and that makes sense, right? If you look at the charts of our demands for increase and our ability and our commitment to increasing our energy grid capacity in the United States, right? Our demand is outstripping our pace of increasing the grid capacity, right? So the idea that you would be canceling any kind of program that would increase our grid's capacity to a large extent, especially in an area that apparently is already experiencing high cost problems, is just literally the exact opposite thing we should be doing. And also with the full context that this went through all of the proper channels of authorization, right? This was approved by the military. This was approved by all the government agencies to ensure that there was no national security issue. So to say, like, to just completely halt all production, to say you guys have to stop everything right now and not do any more until we say it's okay, but also, and just vaguely say national security and give no further details or any sort of time scale about that you're going to, when you're going to lift this restriction or any kind of indication that you're doing this with any kind of urgency or whatever, right? It's so blatantly transparent that this is not a good faith, decision, that there was no real, there was no real security concerns with regards to this, and that was just a very bad and obvious cover for more cynical reasons for doing what they're doing, right? To benefit oil and gas interests at the expense of the average American. This new fight between the two governors and the feds could play out similarly to the fight between New York Governor Kathy Hochul and the Trump administration over the Empire Wind project earlier this year. After weeks of developer Equinor threatening to walk away from the halted project due to the high costs of delayed construction, the Trump administration reversed course and lifted the ban, claiming it has struck a deal with Hochul, a Democrat, to allow a natural gas pipeline to be built in the state. On the day the Interior Department lifted the order, wait, hold on. After weeks, the Trump administration reversed course and lifted the ban, claiming it had struck a deal with Hochul, a Democrat, to allow a natural gas pipeline to be built in the state. Okay, so Trump is literally just acting as an arm of these oil and gas interests, and is holding literally holding this wind project in a Democrat blue state, the New York, hostage until Hochul, the governor of New York, gave literal direct concessions to the oil and gas interests via allowing some natural gas pipeline to be built or whatever, right? It's just, we are at a point of pure full regulatory capture. I mean, there's no other way to describe it, right? Trump is literally just blatantly representing oil and gas interests at the expense of the average American. There's no other reasonable way to interpret this. On the day the Interior Department lifted the order, Secretary Doug Burgum thanked Hochul in a social media post for her willingness to move forward on critical pipeline capacity. But a representative for Hochul's office told Canary Media at the time that no deal on any natural gas pipeline was reached. That's kind of funny. McGee and Lamont, or perhaps Ørsted, could also opt for litigation, a route not taken by Hochul or Equinor during the Empire Wind drama. I imagine they're avoiding doing that because then it really does tie up the project in sort of into legal limbo, right? Right now, it's just Trump saying you can't do this, and theoretically, there could be some backlash for that, and to the extent that there isn't much substance behind him just saying stop it because of security reasons, right? It seems like it's much easier to reverse. But if they were to try and litigate it and take it to court, then it is much easier for the Trump administration to just be like, oh, they've just picked, we carried the ball so far. They just picked the ball up and kept carrying it for us, right? We don't even have to do anything anymore. We just need to let it just linger in the courts for months and years and let it die on the vine, right? You're almost doing the work for them. So I understand why they won't be wanting to lean towards the court, litigation route, when in most other circumstances like this, they would. It's just that the Trump administration is so partisan and so brazenly cynical on this matter that it actually might hurt them to take the more legal, proper route. Ørsted blamed its financial troubles on unexpected developments outside our control. Now the European firm is reeling from yet another unexpected blow from the Trump administration. So yeah, this is just so obviously in the interest, this is so obviously done in the interest of oil and gas companies and executives and moneyed interests and whatnot, at the expense of the average American taxpayer, energy consumer, who is necessarily going to have to pay a larger energy bill. Their energy bill is going to be higher in the long run as a result of not having this project, either not having it done quickly in the timescale that it was supposed to be done, or potentially, if they're successful with all of this, getting the whole project to be canceled entirely. It also is just so obviously the exact opposite thing we need to be doing when you look at all the info about the demand for the U.S. energy grid and how the increasing in our capacity of our energy grid is not keeping pace with our increase in demand, right? This is the exact opposite thing we should be doing. And, the final takeaway is this whole using national security interests as the reason for just this blanket stopping of the whole project without any other information, without any other indication that you're trying to be urgent about this. right? And the fact that it already went through the military and all these other governmental agencies and departments to ensure that there was no problems, and they all got the seal of approval that it's kosher, right? It just shows that they're cynically using the concept of national security interests for their regulatorily captured oil and gas sycophantic executive interests or whatever.